All right, what made me decide to have a home birth rather than an elective C-section or a hospital natural delivery? When I was thinking about having a baby, I was quite on the fence about what to do. When I was younger, I always thought that an elective C-section sounded far more convenient, far less traumatic, and just all around less scary than a natural delivery. As I got older and as I heard more people sharing their stories and kind of learned a little bit here and there about birth, I started to question whether a C-section would be better for me and for the baby. Then, when I found out that I was pregnant, I started very, very seriously thinking about, okay, how's this baby going to exit my body? And I started doing more research and I started listening more carefully to people sharing their experiences. And the more I read up on it, the more I understood about the process of natural birth, the more I understood about the different stages and purposes and effects of labor, the more I started thinking, natural delivery sounds like it's the better option. It sounds like it has a quicker and easier recovery time. It sounds like there are a lot of important processes, a lot of important hormones that take place in natural delivery. And this led me to then thinking about, okay, well, if natural delivery is maybe more the option that I want to go for, how's that going to happen? Because I'm not really a fan of hospitals and I'm not really a fan of people being in my space, especially in when I was imagining an event as private and as intimate and as like an earth shaking and shattering as birth. So I I did join a Facebook group, a natural birthing group my for my country, for South Africa, and there in that group there are birth stories that ladies share and lots of different questions that ladies ask, and they talk about different gynecologists in the different areas and how supportive they are of natural delivery. And it was through that I started learning about how not all care providers, not all obstetricians are created equally, and some of them will have a very, very strong preference towards cesarean sections. And that made me think, oh, I wonder if my regular gynecologist is for or against natural deliveries. And it turns out that she was one of the C-section team members. So that made me look for a new care provider. And that led me into going down the rabbit hole of midwife-led prenatal and birth care. And that led me down to finding a midwife who covered my area. And she offered home birth as well as birthing in her childbirth center. So for the first couple of months of the pregnancy, I was going through all of this information, and of course the crippling fatigue of the first trimester. And once I went for my first appointment with the midwife early in the second trimester, and started asking her questions, because I was filled with like what ifs, because I was thinking about home birth and like the idea of it sounded nice, but I was pretty scared about how far we are from a hospital if anything went wrong. And I was asking the midwife a million and one questions about how she would handle different emergency situations, and trying to get an idea of how common emergencies are in natural deliveries. She was very relaxed in terms of, she didn't give the impression that she thought that complications were likely. And the way that she was talking about birth started to change my perspective of like how it's portrayed in the movies, of like women screaming and begging for drugs and this and that, to it's as simple as just catching the baby. Which, obviously it's not quite that simple, but her demeanor shifted my perception and my expectation and my kind of anticipation of what it might be like. And from there, I started going down more rabbit holes of, well, what could birth actually be? What are the factors of a home birth that make it something that women choose? And I looked into various scientific studies. There's a very useful website called Evidence-Based Birth that takes the results of studies, looks at how good the studies were in terms of whether they were biased, or whether they may have been influenced by the researchers, or how big the sample population was in the study, or how big the study was. And that started opening up my world quite a lot in terms of my preconceived ideas about birth and how dangerous it might be, and turned out to not be so dangerous, not nearly as dangerous as I thought it was, and not nearly as scary as I thought it was. So the more research I did, the more I looked into the information available, especially from birth workers, especially from labor and delivery nurses on the internet, and midwives and doulas. The more I saw how these women were talking about birth, the more I started to break down my preconceived ideas about it, and started to let go of the fear and anxiety and just general negative opinions about birth that I got mostly from movies and from how other women spoke about it, to looking at, well, in a setting where the woman who's in labor is feeling safe and supported, and she has the tools to work through the physical challenges, the pain of labor, it can be well, I'm not going to say a beautiful event. For some women it is. Some women enjoy their labors. But it can be, yes, a physical challenge, but one that doesn't have to be fraught with danger and fear and anxiety and screaming for pain medication and laying on your back with your legs in the air and the doctor telling you to push your baby out. And in my second trimester, through all of this rabbit hole exploration that I did, I decided, okay, home birth is what I want. My home is where I feel safe. I don't want to have to travel anywhere before the birth and then travel home with a newborn. It was quite clear at that point that my pregnancy was low risk, and if it continued to be low risk, which it did, home birth was what I felt most comfortable with. And my midwife was happy to come out to my home, which was an hour away from her and an hour away from the hospitals, a little bit faster if you are driving in an emergency situation. But still, the more I educated myself, the more I realized everything I thought about birth was not necessarily true. And the more I learned about it, the more I learned how the way that births are managed in hospital settings these days, the way that the births are managed is what leads to complications most of the time, and is what leads to traumatic birth stories most of the time. Or let me maybe rather frame it differently. Most traumatic birth stories and most complications in labor and delivery are caused by the way that births are managed in hospitals. So I didn't want to risk that either. I didn't want to risk some doctor coming and trying to impose their management style on me when I wanted to be able to move around freely. I didn't want to have any synthetic oxytocin. I didn't want to have any labor management in that sense. I just wanted to be able to labor on my own, let my body do its thing, and get the baby out. And it really, really, it breaks my heart to see so many women blindly trusting their obstetricians, which sometimes works out great for them, but sometimes it leads to birth trauma. Sometimes it leads to unnecessary C-section when the mother wanted a natural delivery, but the doctor says, oh no, for this and this reason we need to do a C-section, and it ends up being a non-reason. And from how many birth stories like that I have read and heard, I didn't want to be another statistic. And in my view, it's so simple to educate ourselves to the point where we can make properly informed decisions, because part of the problem with the current way that a lot of obstetricians deal with pregnancies and with labor and delivery is they don't give the woman all of the information so that she can make an informed decision. They use fear to drive the woman towards making certain decisions without explaining the pros and cons, without explaining the risks even. And so much of that could be avoided simply by women taking their own education into their own hands and informing themselves. But so far, from what I've seen, majority of women simply are not interested in that. They don't want to educate themselves. They want to leave their care entirely in someone else's hands. So if you are pregnant or thinking of becoming pregnant in the near or far future, please educate yourself. There's so much information available at your fingertips. I'll put some useful links in the description that you can look into. You don't have to read up on everything. You don't have to go down the rabbit hole the way that I did. I'll leave the most important sources of information. And please just educate yourself so that you can make a properly informed decision when the time comes, so that you don't get bullied into doing something by a care provider who wants to make sure that they can still go and play golf on the weekend in case you go into labor. Okay, right, so that is my story, and let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, thanks for watching.